Coming out, please. Court, all rise. This honorable court is open. Please be seated.
Good morning. So I know the medical examiner is the next witness. We're going to interrupt Mr. Amoroso's testimony for that. And I did recall, and I think counsel has been conferring about the issue regarding photos. So has there been an agreement on that, or do we have to discuss that?
We agree with respect to some, but not others.
Okay. Should we preview some of those that you do not agree with?
I think so.
Okay. Mr. Deacon?
That's fine, Ron, that makes sense. My suggestion, for what it's worth, is that I blank the gallery, but leave, obviously your Honor's screen is always on, and the lawyer's screen, and then I can put the photos on the monitor for your Honor, rather than do it at Sidebar and have them sort of fumble with them. But
Okay, I'm sorry. You're saying right now?
yes, just as we're discussing the photos,
Okay,
I can
yes.
put them up on
Okay.
everybody's screen.
That's fine.
It's a little cumbersome to bring these up and.
Okay, I just didn't want,
They're going to show up.
Right, I think to have,
We can do it in the
I think there's some concern about, I mean, we could put the screens down on the table.
No. I don't know, maybe it's just as easy to do it.
Okay, let's do it sidebar. We're going to take a very short recess, come back at 10 o'clock. The lawyers have agreed to enter into a stipulation with regard to some of these photos, and then as others, it looks like there is no objection. So to work out, except for one, which I think I overruled the objection, I'm going to let it in. So if we could have those exhibits pre-marked and the stipulation worded, and I could read it to the jury, and then we can just go right through. So we'll take a short recess.
Court, all rise, please. Court's in a brief recess. Thank you. You may be seated. I'll put the water over you this time. All rise. Jury injury.
Court.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, all persons having anything to do before the Honorable Justice of the Superior Court, now sitting at Boston, within and for the County of Suffolk, draw near, give your attendance, and you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and this Honorable Court. This court is now open. Please be seated.
Your Honor, the trial of Commonwealth versus Michael McCarthy, docket number 15-11792. I'll file the President 15, jury the President.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. There were a few things we needed to take care of, but we're ready to go now. Before we begin, I just want to make sure you followed my instructions and you haven't talked about this case. haven't done any independent investigation, haven't heard anything about this case outside of the courtroom, and that nothing else has occurred that would affect your ability to be fair and impartial. If you have followed my instructions and there's nothing to report, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Again, for logistical reasons, we're going to take a witness out of order, that is interrupt Mr. Amoroso's testimony and put on the medical examiner who has to schedule his day and to accommodate his schedule. That's going to be our next witness. And then once he's finished, we'll return to Mr. Amoroso. So are you ready to call him?
Thank you, Your Honor. The people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts call Dr. Henry Niels.
You shall give this testimony, you shall give this court sincerity, and you shall not pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant of the bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God? Yes.
Good morning.
Come on.
Good morning, Dr. Niels.
Good morning.
Can I ask you please to introduce yourself to the jurors and spell your last name for the court reporter?
My name is Dr. Henry Niels. Last name is spelled Nields.
And doctor, what sort of medicine do you practice?
Forensic pathology.
And for those who may not know, what is forensic pathology?
It's a branch of medicine in which a physician, among other things, will perform autopsies to determine cause and manner of death in sudden, violent, unexpected deaths.
Dr. Niels, what is your current position?
Currently Chief Medical Examiner in the Commonwealth.
And what are your responsibilities as Chief Medical Examiner in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Just in addition to responsibilities as a staff medical examiner, I have some administrative responsibilities to oversee the central office in Boston, and we have satellite offices on the Cape in Worcester and Holyoke.
So, are you in charge of both the, well, there's a medical side of the medical examiner's office and an administrative side. Do you oversee both?
Yes.
Can you please describe your educational background, starting with college, that prepared you for your current position?
I was at college, boy, that was a while ago, at Union College and University of New Hampshire. Then I did medical school at Boston University, School of Medicine. I did residency training in general pathology at Beth Israel Hospital and Boston University Medical Center, and then went on to do a fellowship training in forensic pathology at the Office of Chief Medical Examiner, also in Boston.
And doctor, I think you may have hidden your light a bit under a bushel. In addition to the medical degree, your MD, do you also hold any other advanced degrees?
I have a PhD in experimental pathology.
And where did you receive that?
At Boston University.
Do you, well, if you would, please describe your professional background that's prepared you for your current position after your education.
I was a medical examiner in Massachusetts, appointed from 1995 until 1998, and then a medical examiner in New York City from 1998 until 2006, and then medical examiner back in Massachusetts since July of 2006.
And since July of 2006, well, what position have you held since July of 2006?
I was a staff medical examiner for the first year back, and then acting chief medical examiner until 2009, when I was appointed as chief medical examiner.
And have you been chief medical examiner continuously since then?
Yes.
Do you hold any certifications as medical certifications?
Board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
And what is board certification, for those who may not know?
It means that you've undergone training in a particular area of medicine at an accredited training program, and then pass an examination in that particular area.
Are you licensed to practice medicine in Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Yes.
Are you licensed to practice medicine anywhere else?
Also in New York State.
Have you held any academic appointments in the course of your career?
I have. I don't remember them all. I apologize.
Perhaps give us the highlights that you can remember.
You know, teaching appointments at Harvard Medical School when I was doing the fellowship and residency, and I had appointments in New York City. I think it was at NYU when I was a medical examiner there. It was principally involved in teaching residents that rotate through the office.
Are you a member of any professional societies?
Yes.
Which ones?
National Association of Medical Examiners, American Academy of Forensic Sciences.
And how long have you been a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences?
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Dr. Nields, did you become involved at some point did you become involved in the case of a young girl whose identity was not known at the time, whose body was found on the harborside beach in Winthrop on Deer Island?
Yes.
And when did you first become involved in that case?
Well, I was first involved on June 25th of 2015.
And what was your involvement on June 25th of 2015?
It was in fielding calls and reviewing. That was when we were called at the medical examiner's office regarding that case. I was made aware of the case at that time.
And did you have further involvement besides fielding calls and consulting?
Yes.
What was that?
I performed an autopsy on the 26th of June in 2015.
Can you briefly summarize, or maybe not so briefly, however, whatever time you need, summarize what an autopsy is and, in very general terms, how it's conducted?
An autopsy is a post-mortem examination of the body. Involves initially external examination of the body, focusing on any disease or injury that might be present, and then that's followed by internal examination of body organs. Again, you're focusing on any signs of disease or injury that may be present as a way of explaining how the individual died.
And what sort of elements or factors go into an autopsy?
I'm not 100% sure what you mean, but we take photographs, we make a diagram as best we can of the external findings. We open the body, remove organs, examine the organs, weigh the organs. We collect body fluids and occasionally organs as well to send to a toxicology laboratory. Sometimes we'll have specialists perform certain specialty examinations, such as neuropathology, and we'll collect in certain cases, we'll collect certain items for evidence.
Are you provided, in a typical case, are you provided with and/or do you consider any information beyond the actual examination of the body and the testing you've described?
Absolutely.
What kind?
Essentially, any information we get regarding the circumstances surrounding the death or any history about the individual at all, we'll do our best to get as much of that information as possible.
And I think well, let me ask you this too, just in case there's any confusion about this. When you say an autopsy is a post-mortem exam, post-mortem just in English means?
After death.
Okay. And you've, I think, described this or answered this to some extent already, but is an autopsy documented in some way?
Yes.
How?
We have initial diagrams that we write up, and then it's followed by a written report.
And I think you may have indicated, correct me if I'm wrong, that the autopsy is photographed as well?
Yes, usually.
In the course of an autopsy, let me ask you, is it practice in some or all autopsies to conduct what's called a sexual assault evidence collection kit?
Not in all cases.
Okay. In some cases?
Yes.
And what is a sexual assault evidence collection kit? In broad terms, you don't have to walk. I'm not asking you to walk through the steps, but what is it?
It's just essentially another word for a rape kit. Just taking samples from different areas of the body.
And in general terms, what areas of the body are samples taken from?
Generally, you're taking swabs from the vagina, or in a woman or female vagina, from the anus. Take often oral swabs. Take head hair, pubic hair if it's present, fingernail clippings if that's possible, and a sample of blood.
And when you say oral swabs, what are you referring? What is
The mouth.
And in the autopsy that you conducted on Bella Bond, was the sexual assault evidence collection kit performed?
Yes.
And you said fingernail scrapings are done if possible. Were they
Yes.
done in this case?
I believe so, yes.
Would you please set out for the jury the significant findings of your autopsy on Bella Bond?
She was a young girl. She was, in our measurements, approximately 37.5 inches, tall, approximately 30.5 pounds. She, apart from being partially decomposed, she was appeared normally developed and well nourished. As I say, she had some moderately advanced levels of decomposition on her body. I don't know if you wanted me
You
to
can
go into that a
continue.
little bit.
Sure. With the court's leave, rather than just place questions, if he may summarize his findings in a narrative fashion.
I'm okay with that until Mr. Shapiro wants to interrupt or object, which
So-
is, he's happy to, he's fine to do.
You can continue, Dr. Hansley.
Thank you. So there's some discoloration of the body as an indication of the postmortem changes. There was some skin slippage of the body. There was a thin called purge coming out of some of the orifices or openings of the body. There was a relatively bad smell or foul odor to a body. There was some partial bloating of the body as well.
Doctor, let me interrupt you just for a moment to ask you to define two terms that you just used. What is skin slippage?
Skin slippage is something that happens after death when the chemical bonds essentially that attach the different layers of skin together during life, those start to break down and the skin starts to essentially peel off in areas.
On its own?
Well, probably eventually it's obviously hastened if there's any kind of movement of the body.
And you use the term purge, and I think
Yes.
you explained it, but I just want to be clear what that means.
It's essentially leakage of fluid from the body, and it's as blood vessels break down inside the body, the fluid in the vessels starts to leak out, and it can be manifest by that leakage coming out of areas like the nose or the mouth.
Doctor, before you continue discussing the significant findings, have you mentioned all the findings that are relevant to the question of decomposition?
Probably decomposition. I think in addition, she had some wrinkling of her the skin of her. She was wet, and the skin of her hands and the skin of her feet were all wrinkled. That's something that that you can often see in bodies that have been submerged in water.
Dr. Niels, were you able to assess from your examination of the body and the decomposition for how long she had been deceased?
It would be I wasn't able to give a precise length of time.
Why is that?
It's not clear to me the temperature of the body over the period of time that she was dead, and that can the rate of decomposition of a body varies a lot with the temperature, with the environmental temperature.
Is there, if you knew the temperature, if you were able to know the temperature of the body at all times, would you be able to say with precision from looking at the decomposition when she died?
Unfortunately, probably not.
Why is that?
Well, I think there's well, I know that there's variability also in the rate of decomposition from person to person. It's going to vary also with the internal temperature of the body. It could come up with certainly a more precise estimate as to the time, as to the length of time, if you were certain of the constant temperature, then you'd be able to give a better estimate. But I still would be hesitant to say that estimate would be 100% accurate.
If you were asked to provide, for example, an estimated range of the passage of time between Bellabon's death and the autopsy, or the location of her body on the beach, would you be able to provide a range?
I could provide an estimated range of probably, she had probably been dead for at least a week and easily for a month, possibly more.
And having provided that range, can you be any more precise within that range or not?
No.
Please continue describing the significant findings of your autopsy.
She had multiple areas of discoloration in the skin, but some of them were, in my opinion, bruises, contusions or bruises. She had an area of bruising on the back of her left elbow, which extended over her, the lower part of her left upper arm and over the proximal part of her left forearm. She had
what does proximal mean?
Close to the. It's higher up on the forearm, essentially.
Please continue.
She had another contusion or bruise to the back of her right elbow. She had an area of contusion, soft tissue, as evidenced by soft tissue hemorrhage in the over the abdomen, in a focal area of the abdomen. She had an area of soft tissue hemorrhage also in the lower part of the middle of the back and the left upper back over the area of the scapula, or shoulder blade. And she also had contusion on the lateral or outward side of her left thigh, and two smaller contusions on the inner portion of her right thigh.
No, sorry, contusion is?
Bruise. It's just another word for a bruise.
And Dr. King, with respect to the bruises, are you able to tell the jury how old or not old, how young or old, basically the age of each of those bruises?
Not with any precision, no.
Why is that?
Again, in this case, there are a couple of reasons. One, it's hard. The color of the bruise varies a lot. Anyway, from person to person, and I think probably to some extent to the severity of the bruise, and also as the body's decomposing, it's changing color as part of the decomposition, so it makes it very difficult to age it precisely.
What can you tell the jury about what caused each of these bruises?
Only that they were caused by some sort of blunt impact with her body.
And when you say some sort of blunt impact, are you able to say, for example, whether this was an inflicted injury, somebody striking her, or an accidental injury? As to each of the bruises, are you able to say more than about the nature of the blunt impact?
No.
And why is that?
It's just the nature of the bruise. There's really no way, without further information, to know whether it was inflicted by someone else or not.
Thank you.
So as I understand it, some exhibits have been pre-marked, is that right?
They actually have not been pre-marked, Your Honor, but they're agreed upon, and I'm going to show each one to defense counsel. We're going to review it carefully to make sure that it follows the court's instructions.
Okay. And so I take it there's no problem with publishing it to the jury once you've cleared it with defense counsel? In other words, we don't have to go through a two-step process. I guess is what I was hoping
Oh,
we could avoid.
I understand.
If Mr. Shapiro looked at the photograph and he doesn't object to that being admitted into evidence, I was
No
thinking.
objection,
Okay.
we should get a number.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, let's do it that way.
Thank you, Your Honor. Publishing, now showing you, Doctor, and publishing to the jury what's been marked Exhibit 82. Can you indicate for us, if you would, what that's a photograph of?
It's the area of bruising that I mentioned on the back of her left elbow and upper arm and forearm.
And if you would, Doctor, and you may have to push a little bit on the screen, if you could use your finger to circle the bruise that you see. You have to push fairly firm.
Oops. So, apologies, there's a line there that should be.
That's it. Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, I anticipate that the court is going to, and maybe this is the time for them to read the stipulation to the jury, Your Honor.
Yes, do you have that? So the parties have stipulated that there are photographs that document the bruising to Bellabon's right upper arm, abdomen, lower back, and upper left shoulder. The medical examiner is going to be describing this, but to the extent the photographs are not actually presented to you, you're not to draw any inference in favor or against either party.
Please give me a mark. I think without objection.
Yes. Exhibit 83.
Showing you, Doctor, and the jury at the same time what's been marked Exhibit 83. Do you recognize what that's a photograph of?
Yes.
What's that a photograph
It's a
of?
photograph of the contusion to the lateral aspect of her left thigh.
Okay. And if you would, again, just use your finger to make a circle around the area of the contusion.
Excuse me.
I guess I should ask that the record reflect that the doctor has circled an area in the middle area of the photograph.
Yeah. Exhibit 84.
Doctor, showing you what's been marked Exhibit 84, do you recognize what this is a photograph of?
Yes, and it includes the two smaller bruises to the inner portion of her right thigh.
And can you circle the two smaller bruises?
Yeah.
I'm going to start over. I can start you over.
Do you have a pencil I can write on?
I don't know if you should be
Well, I
writing.
can't
Yeah, I'm not sure. Try with your finger
Your
again.
That's right
eraser
again.
pen.
I'll
What
try
about the
again. I
eraser
can
pen?
just.
I'm not sure about an eraser on the
Okay.
screen. Thank you, Doctor. And may the record indicate the doctor has made circles to the right side of the photograph, midway up the photograph on the right side.
Yes.
Doctor, there is, just so that everyone's clear and there's no misimpression, above those and a bit to the left, there's an area that looks sort of different from the rest of the skin. Do you see, I can actually circle that. You see that area that I've circled in purple there?
Yes.
What is that?
The part where the skin is off, that's an area of skin slippage that I was referring to earlier. And you can also see some darker discoloration of the skin. Those, I believe, are postmortem artifacts. And that's one of the difficulties you can have with identifying bruising.
And Doctor, in each case of bruising, did you do something, when you identified potential bruises, did you do something to confirm that in fact what you thought were bruises were bruises?
In those lesions on the skin, I made incisions into those lesions to look for hemorrhage in the subcutaneous tissue or tissue underneath the skin.
And were there any instances in this case in which you did that and found out that something that you thought might be a bruise was in fact not a bruise?
Yes.
So when you're testifying as to contusions or bruises, is it fair to say that those are all things that you verified by cutting into them inside, making an incision and seeing bruising below the skin level? Or hemorrhage?
Yes, yes. In the case of the injuries to the abdomen and the back, those were identified by essentially removing the skin over them.
And just for the sake of illustration, in this photograph, is there any evidence of skin slippage other than the area where I made a purple circle?
You can see early evidence of it more towards the lower part of it. There are little wavy lines. That's also evidence of skin slippage.
Thank you, Doctor. Can you, Doctor, please continue describing the significant findings of your autopsy?
Well, there's essentially no gross, meaning things you can see with your eye, or microscopic evidence of a significant natural disease in this child. There were no other significant internal injuries that I identified. I removed the left and right eyes for examination by a neuropathologist to look for retinal hemorrhages. I didn't see any optic nerve sheath hemorrhages. I had the neuropathologist examine the eyes to search for any evidence of retinal hemorrhages, which we didn't see. And we sent samples off for toxicology testing. The initial screen came back in the toxicology testing and showing low levels of ethanol, which is almost certainly due to the state of decomposition of the body. Ethanol is produced as the body decomposes.
Ethanol is
essentially a drinking alcohol.
And explain, if you can explain again why you weren't surprised by the finding of ethanol in this child that young.
Because again, in decomposing bodies, the bacteria that are breaking down portions of the body produce ethanol as a byproduct.
Was there anything else that caught your eye or that attracted your attention in the toxicology report?
In the initial screen, there was a positive test for amphetamine, which later proved to be a false positive.
When you say amphetamine, is any specific type of amphetamine? Amphetamine or methamphetamine?
I'd have to look. I thought it was.
The court's permission, may you refresh his recollection?
Yes, if he can refer to his notes and to see if that refreshes his recollection.
The notes say there was methamphetamine that was identified in the screen by the ELISA stain or the immunostaining.
And you've
testing of it.
And you've testified that it was a false positive?
Yes.
How do you know that?
because confirmatory testing that was done said that there was no, identified no presence of methamphetamine or a number of other types of methamphetamine.
And how do you explain that there was a positive result on the initial screen and a negative result on the confirmatory testing?
Well, the initial testing is done with antibodies. That it's a sensitive test, but not as specific a test as the other testing that's done. Meaning that that there are antibodies used in the testing that identify certain components of drugs, but unfortunately they also recognize components of other elements. In the case of decomposition is seen in this particular type of testing for the methamphetamines.
And is this something that was a first for you, or were you familiar with this this scenario?
It's one of the first that I remember seeing.
Is it reported in the literature?
Yes.
Of forensic pathology?
Yes, and also as well, the director of the Toxicology lab went over the findings with me.
Is there any doubt in your mind that was a false positive?
No.
Doctor, you mentioned that you looked for signs of natural disease process. Is there any sort of testing that was done to further test for the presence of disease process?
Again, I looked at the organs, the normal shape and size and sectioning of the organs. They all didn't show any signs of disease. I looked at sections of heart, lung, liver, kidneys under the microscope and didn't see evidence of significant natural disease.
And is there kind of testing called histology that's done in the course of this?
That's essentially looking at things on the microscope. Looking at tissue on the microscope is essentially what histology is.
And after doing that, did you see any sign of disease process in the
No.
You indicated that you removed her eyes and sent them to a specialist for examination. Why did you do that?
Well, retinal hemorrhaging is something that I prefer to have a neuropathologist look for. I can certainly identify optic nerve sheath hemorrhaging, but the eye should be cut section in a particular way to properly identify retinal hemorrhaging.
And what's the significance of retinal hemorrhaging in a child that age if you find it?
It's not definitive by itself certainly, but it can indicate that there was some sort of shaking injury to the child.
And that's why you examined
Yes.
it, why you tested. And was there any sign of retinal hemorrhage in Bellabong?
No.
Doctor, did you also, in addition to your autopsy, the actual examination of the body, as well as the testing that you described, did you consider any other information in connection with your diagnosis?
Yes.
What's that?
All of the investigative reports that were given to me.
And based on your autopsy and review of all the investigative materials, did you reach a conclusion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to the cause of Bellabong's death?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, I believe it was either due to an asphyxial death or some type, or commotio cordis.
I'm sorry,
So-
what?
Commotio cordis.
So I'm going to first ask you if you would dispel commotio cordis.
C-O-M-O-T-I-O. First word. Second word, C-O-R-D-I-S.
And what is asphyxia? What's an asphyxia death? Asphyxial death.
Asphyxial deaths are deaths that are caused essentially by the blockage of oxygen to the body. So they can happen either by preventing the oxygen from being breathed into the body, such as with suffocation with a plastic bag or a pillow over a head or a blanket over a head, a hand over the face and the nose. It can be caused by compression on the chest or the abdomen. When you breathe, your chest expands. If you can somehow inhibit that expansion from happening, either by pressing hard on the chest or by pressing hard on the abdomen to prevent the diaphragm from contracting and pushing downward. That can also inhibit breathing, which can lead to an asphyxial death. Strangulation is a slightly different form, but also a form of an asphyxial type death in which you're not blocking the actual breathing mechanism, but you are blocking the oxygenated blood from flowing to the brain where it's needed. So those are just examples.
Doctor, did you find in the course of the autopsy any outward signs, any physical manifestations of asphyxia?
No.
And did that in any way trouble you as your diagnosis that you didn't find such outward manifestations?
No, asphyxial deaths, particularly in children and particularly in a partially decomposed child, can often not leave physical findings at autopsy.
And what's the significance? I'm sorry.
I just said unfortunately.
What is the significance of decomposition to that the observation you just made? Why is a decomposed child?
Oh, it's just that much harder to identify of the discolorations. You know, some of them might be due to compression of the nose and mouth, but you really can't make that definitive statement because of there's normal changes going on in the appearance of the tissue because of decomposition.
And what is commodio cordis?
It's essentially an induction of a dysrhythmia in the heart resulting from a sharp blow to the chest over the area of the heart.
And why is it that you can't rule out either asphyxial death or commodio cordis?
I can't rule them. I'm not sure.
Well, you said that, in your opinion, the cause of death is either asphyxial injury or commodio cordis. Why do you list both?
Well, based upon all of the, it's based upon all of the findings and the police investigation that leads me to that conclusion.
And Doctor, did you prepare a report in connection with the autopsy?
Yes.
Did you also prepare a death certificate?
Yes.
This time, Your Honor, the Commonwealth would offer in evidence the death certificate prepared by Dr. Niels.
Okay, that's admitted. The lady file.
And the Commonwealth would also simultaneously introduce the certificate of life for Bellabon.
86.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I have no further questions.
Good morning, Dr. Niels.
Good morning.
Dr. Niels, do you have a copy of your autopsy report
Yes.
in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. On the first page of the autopsy report, you indicate that the autopsy was conducted on June 25th, 2015. Is that correct?
It says date of autopsy 6/25/15, and on the second page, in the verbal description, it says that I performed the autopsy on June 26th in 2015.
Okay.
So on the
which
film,
is it?
the autopsy was on the 26th, as I said. I did review photographs and reports and descriptions that were done on the 25th, but my physical autopsy was done on the 26th.
Okay, so is that just a mistake on the first page where it says date of autopsy 6/25?
I think it should have been more. It would have been more clear if it had said 6/26. Yes.
Okay. Well, it would have been correct
It would have absolutely been correct.
Okay. Now, in the autopsy report, there is a final neuropathology diagnosis on that is included. It's included on page 1435 of the Bates number on my document.
Do you want to approach the witness, Mr. Shapiro, and show him, or
I found my copy of the neuropathology report.
Okay, on just so we're on the same page, the copy of the autopsy report provided to me is, I'm showing it to you, and on the bottom is page number 1435. And my question is,
so is it the same page you're looking at, Dr.?
No, it's from a
Different.
this is, we went over this before. This is from a different report. This was incorrectly copied and given to you, but it's not part of the report.
well, let me just ask you the question so we can clarify.
Certainly.
You agree that in the report that was provided to the defendant, there is a final neuropathology diagnosis of a bilateral subdural hemorrhage, multiple subacute cortical contusions with subarachnoid hemorrhage, and a subacute right temporal contusion with caviton and right to left shift with right uncal herniation and brainstem compression with subacute infarction. That was in that report, correct?
That was in the copy that I'm looking at here that was given
That
to
was
you.
provided to me.
Yes.
But in your autopsy report, under the section dealing with the head, you say there is no epidural, subdural, or subarachnoid hemorrhage.
That's correct.
Okay, that was in your report. Now,
Yes.
is that correct? That
Yes.
there was no hemorrhage or any injury to the brain?
There was no visible injury to the brain.
Okay. But the report that was provided, which does say that there was injury, was wrong?
Yeah. Well, yes, it's wrong for this case, certainly.
So it was a different portion of an autopsy report for some other person that was provided to the defendant?
Yes. Isn't it? Yes.
So again, that was a mistake.
Yes.
Okay. Now, as I understand it, you have testified to a reasonable medical certainty that the cause of death of Bellabond was asphyxial death or commodio cordis. Is that right?
Yes.
So in your opinion, it was one or the other?
Yes.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty which one it was?
No.
So it was one or the other.
Yes.
Now, it's true, is it not, that asphyxial death or asphyxial injury was not mentioned in your autopsy report?
Those words were not used.
Okay. So there was no reference in the autopsy report to death occurring as a result of asphyxial injury, was there?
Those words, those exact words, were not were not used. I mean, the cause of death that was in the autopsy report
But
would
it-
encompass
it-
those.
it did not.
Hold on, Mr. Shapiro, you have to let the witness finish. So the cause of death, what? You were going to finish the cause of death?
Well,
I'd like him to finish the answer.
I know, but I think we're on delicate ground here.
Okay, so I'll let the witness finish the answer.
The cause of death that I put on the death.
Well, that has been,
He's going to be allowed to finish the statement. Go ahead.
The cause of death that I put on the death certificate and on the autopsy report would encompass both the death by an asphyxia as well as, or the commotio cordis.
okay. But just so we're clear, the autopsy report, in so many words, did not mention asphyxial death,
Not in those words.
and it did not mention asphyxial injury,
Not in those words, no.
and it did not mention commotio cordis.
Not in those words, no.
Now, there are often signs that are visible or detectable upon autopsy of an asphyxial injury or asphyxial death, correct?
There can be.
Yeah. And in the case of suffocation, there are certain types of hemorrhages that may be visible, correct?
Usually not in suffocations. The hemorrhages, the particular hemorrhages that you see you can see them in strangulations, and they're really more the result of increased pressure in the small vessels in the conjunctiva of the eyes.
So you mentioned strangulation is a type of asphyxial death, or
Yes.
can cause asphyxial
Yes.
death. And one of the signs of strangulation may be petechial hemorrhages, which are hemorrhages in the eye.
Yes, you can see that, yes.
Okay, there were no evidence of any petechial hemorrhage in this case.
Correct.
In other kinds of asphyxial death, might you detect nerve sheath hemorrhages?
I think that's a controversy. I don't think you would see that, no.
But some pathologists think you might.
Some pathologists think you might. I'm not one of them.
And in this particular autopsy, you determined that there was no evidence of any nerve sheath hemorrhage.
Right, and not in the optic nerves, correct.
Now, you talked about and you described, I think what you said were blunt impact trauma to various parts of the body.
Yes.
I think there was discussion of some blunt impact trauma to the left and right thighs,
Yes.
and the left and right arms at different places,
Yes.
and the back,
Yes.
and the abdomen.
Yes.
But it's true, is it not, that none of those injuries caused the death of Miss Bond, of Bella Bond?
That's my opinion, correct.
Your opinion is that they did not cause or contribute to her death.
It's my opinion they did not cause her death.
And those were the only signs of any kind of injury to the body that you were able to detect.
Yes, correct.
Now, one of the possible causes of death, which you described as asphyxial injury, correct?
Yes.
And one of the mechanisms that might cause that, you indicated, was compression of the chest.
Yes.
Did you determine that there was any sign in your autopsy findings? Were there any positive findings of chest compression?
No.
You also indicated that another possible cause of asphyxial death would be compression of the abdomen so that the diaphragm could not expand.
Yes.
Was there any sign of compression of the abdominal area?
Well, there was the contusion to the abdominal soft tissue, which could have been part of that, but it's certainly not definitive.
Okay. And in fact, you indicated that all of those contusions did not contribute to her death.
Well, not the contusion itself, right? Right.
Well, I'm saying, putting aside contusions, was there any evidence of compression?
I mean, if there was no contusion, then there was no, I would say there was no evidence other than that contusion.
Okay. Now, the other possible cause of death was, you described commodio. How do you pronounce it? Commodio?
I pronounce it commotio with a T-I-O as commotio.
Okay, commotio cordis. And this is an injury which results in or may result in sudden cardiac death.
Yes.
Or actually, I guess commotio cordis is an injury which does result in sudden cardiac death.
That's my understanding.
And it's caused by a blow over the precordium area.
Yes.
And could you just demonstrate to the jury where the precordium area is?
Well, just in general, over the chest, in the center
When
of
you
the chest.
say, yeah,
I couldn't. That's the best I can do.
So the witness is just placing his hand in the center of his chest.
So over the heart area.
Yes.
And it's true, is it not, that most deaths due to commotio cordis are accidental, usually resulting from some sports injury?
I'm actually not certain. I'm not certain of that. But they certainly have been reported in sports injuries, yes.
Have you actually done any research on commotio cordis?
Means my own studies? No.
Have you researched the authoritative literature in the field regarding commotio cordis?
I've certainly had discussions with other pathologists and read reports of what they believe is happening in commotio cordis.
So, Mr. Shapiro, I think we need to take a break for a juror. I know it's a little early, but I think this is a good time to take a break. I'm hoping illness is not sweeping through your ranks, but we do want to take a break.
Court, all rise, please. Here is whenever you ready to step down and hold it, please.
Court is back in session. Please be seated.
So yes, Mr. Shapiro, sorry to interrupt.
Good morning again, Dr. Niels.
Morning.
Just to step back a ways, you were talking about asphyxial death, and you indicated some of the causes of asphyxial death, one being strangulation.
Yes.
And one of the signs of strangulation is hemorrhaging in the neck area.
You can also see that, yeah, you can.
And you didn't, there were no signs of that in your autopsy, were there?
Correct.
And a pre-mortem breakage of the hyoid bone is also a sign of strangulation, is it not?
Right, you can see that sometimes. You don't actually have to see any of those signs in strangulation, but those are certainly signs that are certainly positive findings.
Okay, and the hyoid bone is in this area of the neck?
Yes,
That is
really above it's above where your laryngeal prominence is.
Okay. Is that above the Adam's apple?
Yes.
Okay. And there were no signs of a pre-mortem broken hyoid bone in your autopsy, was there?
Correct.
Now, getting back to commotio cordis, are you familiar with the treatise Spitz and Fisher Medico-Legal Investigation of Death?
Yes.
Is that considered an authoritative treatise among forensic pathologists?
It's certainly a reference that's used often.
Referring you to pages 394 and 395, would you agree that a localized blunt impact to the chest may cause sudden death due to cardiac arrhythmia?
Yes.
And this condition, also known as commotio cordis or cardiac concussion, is diagnosed when sudden death occurs following blunt chest trauma that leaves no visible signs to the heart. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
A bruise in the chest wall may or may not be present. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Most such cases are accidental and involve adolescent children engaged in sports. Do you agree with that?
You know, I have no way to confirm that. I don't strongly disagree, certainly. I don't know how to confirm that, but it certainly is possible.
But
Absolutely.
you do agree that Spitz and Fisher is an authoritative...
Well, again, I agree. You know, I think it doesn't mean that everything they say in that book is necessarily true. It certainly is a reference that's well respected, though.
Fair enough. Now, in your autopsy findings, did you find any evidence of a blow to the precordium area?
No.
And the precordium area is the area where such a blunt blow would or might cause commotio cordis.
Yes.
And what's the precordium area?
It's just essentially it's the area over the heart.
Okay.
You know, sort of.
So, is it fair to say, Dr. Niels, that there were no positive physical findings in your autopsy that supported either a cause of asphyxial death or commotio cordis?
Right. No positive findings, correct.
And the only other positive findings of injury were the blunt trauma impact injury, which you agree did not have anything to do with the cause of death.
They did. They weren't by themselves the cause of death, no.
And that's a conclusion you reached to a reasonable medical certainty.
Yes. Excuse me.
Now, you indicated that in addition to your autopsy findings, you took into account other information with which you were provided in determining the cause of death.
Yes.
And some of the information you were provided with was a statement made by Rochelle Bond on September 18th when she was interviewed by the police.
It was it was a recording that I listened to, an interview, a recording of that interview.
So you listened to a recording
Yes.
of a statement made by Rochelle Bond on September 18th, 2015 to the police.
I believe that was the date. It was in September. I believe you're correct. That's the date. I don't remember the date.
Now, it's true, is it not, that nothing in Rochelle Bond's statement to the police supports evidence of any kind of asphyxial injury.
I actually don't think that's quite true.
Well, let me ask you this.
But there's nothing specific. There's nothing specific, but there are
Well,
some statements that imply that as definitely as a reasonable possibility.
Well, is there anything in Ms. Bond's statement about suffocation?
There's no specific mention of suffocation.
Or is there
She-
any mention of anything that generally talks about suffocation?
There's a point at which in the interview, as I remember, she speaks about someone standing over the body, hovering over the body, in the area of the abdominal area, and that and it's very vague, but it says individual is standing there, and then the baby was dead. I believe was her, or the child was dead. I believe those were.
Isn't
essentially
it
what she
true
said.
that in the statement that Ms. Bond made about a person hovering over the body, she indicated that she didn't see the person touch the body?
She wasn't certain of that. Right.
And do you recall I'm going to show you page 10. I'm just putting it on your monitor. Starting in the highlighted areas, the question is, did you see him doing anything to her?
I'm sorry, is this a transcript of that statement? Is that it?
Yes. Okay. You see that?
Yes.
I don't know what he was doing to her. And then she was asked again, was he sitting on her, or was he just over her? See that?
Yes.
Now, if he had been sitting on her, that might be some evidence of asphyxial injury, correct?
Yes.
But Ms. Bond said, no, he was just over her. I think he was punching her. What else could he be doing?
Mm-hmm.
And then she was, so punching her is not evidence of asphyxial injury, is it?
That's correct. That's the main reason. That's one reason why I included. I'm not certain if it was an asphyxial death or the commotion cordis,
So,
because it's not
but
clear. From,
you said there was something in Ms. Bond's statement that suggested asphyxial injury, and I'm just asking you to look at this and see if there is anything. And we go on, and she's asked, did you see his arm moving? And then she says, yep, I did see his arm move once, but I thought he was like picking her up. I didn't. I don't fucking know. All I know is when I picked my baby up, she was fucking dead. So her description is of an arm moving away from the body, correct?
It doesn't really say that either way. I would agree that there's, and I think I said this, that there's nothing that specifically says she sees the child being
Well, what
asphyxiated.
What generally do you think she said which would support a notion of asphyxial injury?
Well, only that she sees someone standing over the body and hovering over the body. That I think it doesn't in any way prove, certainly doesn't in any way prove that the child was asphyxiated. I'm not trying to say that. So.
Why does that in your mind suggest suffocation if somebody is standing over a body?
It's certainly not by itself, but it could. It's most certainly, it would be certainly consistent with someone standing over and leaning on the body or covering the
Is there any testimony about leaning on the body?
No.
All right. So you're saying that evidence of somebody standing over a body suggests to you that the person may have suffocated the person?
No. I'm saying that that's that by itself is certainly not enough.
All right.
Right.
Well, is there anything else that you see or saw in Ms. Bond's statement that suggests suffocation, smothering, strangulation, or any other
She does not say.
let me finish.
Sorry.
Any other kind of asphyxial injury?
She does not mention anything specific.
Okay. You say she doesn't mention anything specifically. Did she mention anything generally about suffocation, smothering, strangulation, or any asphyxial injury?
Not that I recall.
Now, are you aware that Ms. Bond said that, testified, that she witnessed Mr. McCarthy strike Bella Bond in the stomach with his fist with such force that her body bounced up in the air and then back down on the mattress on which she was lying? Are you aware of that?
I heard that on the news. I think it wasn't in the original interview that I listened to. But
Okay, so that was not something you took into account in preparing your autopsy report.
correct.
But it's fair to say, is it not, that there is no evidence of such a powerful blow to the Bella Bond's stomach, is there?
Again, there's an area of contusion in her abdomen. I can't tell you the amount of force that was used to create that.
You can tell it didn't...
I can tell you that there were no visible internal injuries of the internal organs.
No visible internal injuries.
To the organs.
To the organs.
Right.
No broken bones.
Correct.
Is it fair to say that if a 200-pound man with a fist struck a 2-year-old child with all his force, that would cause the child to bounce up in the air, that would likely to cause some kind of internal injury?
I would expect that, yes.
So the autopsy findings were not at all consistent with Ms. Bond's most recent description of what happened.
You know, I don't think that it's impossible. I think it's unlikely.
So the answer is that the autopsy findings are not consistent with Ms. Bond's claim, are they?
No, I'm not sure I'm saying the same thing. Because again, I don't want to say that it's impossible for it to happen, it's just I think it's unlikely.
Okay. Now, you are aware, are you not, that Ms. Bond also described seeing injuries to Bella's head, correct?
What I listened to wasn't so much injuries as she described swelling, I think, and discoloration of the head.
Well, she described the head as being blown up and swollen, didn't she?
Swollen, I think, were the words.
And
discolored, I believe she also said
discolored, but also blown up. You remember that?
I don't remember that.
In any case, swollen, discolored, grayish, and she also described that that was what she observed 5 minutes after Bella having been okay, fine, alive. Right?
I don't remember the timing of it, but I don't remember the timing, I'm sorry.
Now, in your autopsy, did you find that there were any injuries of any kind to Bella's head?
Did not see any, no.
Are you aware of any injury or physiological mechanism that could have resulted in or caused what Rochelle Bond described as having occurred in 5 minutes?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. So Ms. Bond's description is not consistent with anything in your autopsy report, is it?
It's a subjective thing what she described, this swelling and discolored. So I can't say.
Well, you can say if you're aware of any physiological mechanism or injury that could result in that happening within 5 minutes, and you said that there were none.
I can't. Well, I said that I can't think of any that would just be localized to the head like that. I didn't see traumatic, definitive traumatic injuries to the head though.
Okay. Or any other injuries that would have caused a swelling to the head and a discoloration.
Right, correct. I did not see that.
So, just to be precise about it, there was nothing in your autopsy report and nothing with which you are familiar that is consistent with Ms. Bond's description.
I feel like I've answered the question already.
Yes or no?
Right, are you having trouble answering it, yes or no?
A little bit, because again, getting back to the description is, what does she mean by swollen and discolored? I mean, I think. If someone's being strangled, their face can turn, at least in hanging cases we see, and even most likely in strangulation, you can see discolorations of the face, but it's not really described in this same way. So
you're not suggesting that there is anything about which you're aware or that you made findings in your autopsy that could explain Ms. Bond's description?
Correct.
Now, you did mention a positive screening test for methamphetamine.
Yes.
That was found in Bella Bond's blood.
Yes.
And this was based on a test of the pooled blood that was examined.
Yes.
Now, would an amphetamine in the body, in Bella Bond's body, resulted in a positive screening for methamphetamine?
I don't know for sure. I don't know. I think if you have cross-reactivity, it's non-specific, so it might not.
Because they're both amphetamines.
Yeah.
Okay.
But both were negative in the confirmatory test.
You were aware, were you not, that Ms. Bond was prescribed Adderall?
I believe you told me that.
Well,
So I'm thinking, yeah.
Okay. So, assuming that's true, Adderall is an amphetamine, is it not?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And it's a potent stimulant of the nervous system.
It's a stimulant.
Well, is it?
It's a stimulant.
Okay. And that's something that could kill a 2-year-old child.
I think it could potentially, yes.
Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions.
Dr. Niels, you testified that you sent out Bella Bond's eyes for neuropathological testing, is that correct?
Yes.
And the results came back?
Yes.
And do you recall what the results were as to Bella Bond's, the neuropathological exam of Bella Bond's eyes?
Well, they were negative for hemorrhage. I can read the report to you if you.
May he consult the report room?
Yeah.
So the diagnosis of both was essentially autolysis with no diagnostic pathologic abnormality.
And very briefly, what does that mean?
Autolysis is essentially it's like self-digestion, and it's a part of decomposition.
And who prepared that report?
Dr. Lindstrom.
And is there a separate page in that report for the final diagnosis?
I'm sorry, that's what I was reading from.
Right. And there is a separate page for the
Yes.
final diagnosis?
Yes.
And in the file for Bella Bond's case, is there another separate page that says final neuropathology diagnosis?
Not in the file.
No, but I mean in the file that was provided in discovery.
The file that was sent, yes.
Okay. And was that also signed by Catherine Lindstrom, MD?
Yes.
Did it have anything to do with this case?
No.
How do you attribute that a second final diagnosis page signed by the same neuropathologist wound up in the file of Bella Bond's case?
It was a clerical evidence error, rather, in the copying of files.
And are you, do you yourself do filing in your office?
No.
Do you do photocopying in your office?
Sometimes of my own things, but not of.
But I mean for production of records productions.
No.
So the presence in the original file that was produced of a second final neuropathology diagnosis page signed by Catherine Lindstrom was a clerical error?
Yes.
May we be heard at sidebar before I proceed, Your Honor?
Okay.
Doctor, you recall when defense counsel was asking you questions a moment ago, or a few moments ago, that he asked you whether the term asphyxia or asphyxial injury or asphyxial death appear in your autopsy report, is that correct?
Yes.
And I get it, your testimony was that those words, those specific words do not, is that correct?
Yes.
And he also asked you whether the words commotio cordis appeared in your autopsy report, is that correct?
Yes.
In your and I believe your answer was the cause of death that you listed in your autopsy report and on the death certificate encompassed both of those concepts, is that correct?
Yes.
And Doctor, were there any findings in your autopsy, physical findings, that you would say are consistent with abdominal compression? I want to be clear here that I'm not asking you diagnostic of abdominal compression, but are there any findings, physical findings, that in your opinion are consistent with abdominal compression?
Yes.
What's that, or what are those?
I think that the hemorrhaging in the soft tissue would be consistent with that.
The
It could
hemorrhaging
certainly
in the soft tissue of the
could be
abdomen?
part of that. It could be part of that.
When defense counsel was asking a question about commotio cordis, he cited a treatise, a reference book.
Yes.
And in the reference book that he read to you, one of the things that the authors said in there is that with commotio cordis, a bruise on the chest might or might not be present. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that is, would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Defense counsel asked you a question. You testified on cross-examination that none of the bruises, the contusions, were fatal, meaning caused Bella Bond's death. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that the same as saying that none of the contusions had anything to do with her death?
It's not quite the same, but it's not quite the same.
And what is the distinction that you see there?
Well, to the extent that I don't think they were part of the direct cause, to the extent that they indicate, to the extent that the abdominal hemorrhage is associated with compression as well as impact, then it would be related in that sense. Yes.
So to be clear, you're not saying to the jury that none of these bruises, these contusions, had anything to do with her death?
I don't think they're part of the direct cause of her death.
But I guess what I'm asking is, are you therefore saying that none of them is related to her death in any way?
No.
You had indicated that the screening test for methamphetamine, in your opinion, was a false positive. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does the confirmatory test that you then had done test for methamphetamine?
I believe so. If I could, I'm 100%. I'm like 99% certain. Can I please
With a
look? And
question.
I can tell you what it tests for.
So reviewing the notes.
It definitely tests for amphetamines and methamphetamines.
And Adderall is an amphetamine. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the confirmatory testing that tests for amphetamines would show a result if there were Adderall present in the body.
I believe so.
And the screening tests for both methamphetamine and amphetamine were negative.
The confirmatory
the
test.
confirmatory test.
Confirmatory test, yes.
Is there, just to repeat a question I asked in direct, is there any question in your mind that the methamphetamine, the preliminary screening for methamphetamine was a false positive?
No.
I have no further questions.
No question.
Okay, thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
So, before bringing in Mr. Amoroso, can I talk to counsel Sidebar about an issue we discussed yesterday? Okay, so we'll recall Mr. Amoroso. So good morning, sir.
Good morning, Judge.
You remain under oath, and you've been speaking loudly. I appreciate that. We can continue with the direct examination.
Thank you. Mr. Amoroso, when we left off yesterday, I believe, and I'm willing to stay corrected if defense counsel has a different memory, but I believe you were testifying about conversation that you had with Ms. Bond at Ashmont Station, or I think you had said that you took her on the train and put her head down, is that right?
Yes.
And where did you go?
First, we stopped at Andrew Station, and then from there we went to Downtown Crossing.
And
Got off
what was
there.
your purpose in going to Downtown Crossing?
Well, the purpose of going to Downtown Crossing was I wanted to know everything that had happened. I wanted every detail I can get out of her.
And did you have a conversation at Downtown Crossing?
Yes.
Was it right there at Downtown Crossing or somewhere else?
It was in the Boston Commons.
So you went from Downtown Crossing to Boston Common?
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you a few more questions about that conversation, but before I do, did you, either of you, at any point that morning, so starting with when you woke up at the Gillette plant all the way to the Boston Common, did either of you use any drugs?
No, not until we got to the Boston Commons.
And when you got to the Boston Common, did either of you use any drugs?
When we got to the Boston Commons, we used.
Okay. And how did you, when you say you used, what did you use?
I had went and purchased a $20 bag of heroin.
Was that when did you buy the heroin?
When?
Mm-hmm.
It was that afternoon.
Okay. And were you on the Common when you bought it?
Yes.
And both of you used it, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you yourself use once or more than once that day?
Once only.
Did Ms. Bond use once or more than once that day?
Once.
And did you have a conversation, just yes or no, did you have a conversation with Ms. Bond about Bella's death?
Yes.
And did the entire conversation happen on the Boston Common?
Most of the conversation happened on the Boston Common, but the entire conversation, no.
Did it start somewhere else or end somewhere else or both?
It ended at my mother's house in Lynn.
And how long would you say your conversation with Ms. Bond was on the Boston Common?
About 6 hours.
And was that 6 hours all about the circumstances surrounding Bella's death?
Yes.
And who did most of the talking?
She did.
And during the course of that 6-hour conversation, did she make comments to you, statements to you, about her involvement in the crime? I want to be clear, I'm not asking you to say what she said. I'm asking you yes or no. Did she make comments to you about her involvement in the crime, yes or no?
No.
Did she make comments to you about her involvement in the cover-up of the crime?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's overruled. I would just tell members of the jury why we're being, the prosecutor is careful here and the witness is not allowed to get into what those statements are, is that certain out-of-court statements that are offered for the truth of the matter in order to prove that something happened are what we call hearsay. And they're excluded because they're not reliable or trustworthy. They haven't been sworn to under the pains and penalties of perjury or subject to cross-examination. So there's good reason for excluding such out-of-court statements. I will also add there are a bunch of exceptions to this rule. So you will hear in the course of this trial a lot of testimony about out-of-court statements. And you may wonder, why was that let in? It was because there was some kind of exception to that rule, and certainly the attorneys helped me with this in determining whether something is hearsay or not. So the witness is not going to be allowed to recount the conversation except to answer, as he just has, yes or no.
And just for the record, I'm moving with that respect.
Okay, and that's denied.
And just to clarify, did she make one statement about her involvement in the cover-up or multiple statements?
Objection.
Overruled.
You may answer. Not
Yes
what
or
she,
no?
I want to be clear, not what she said. The question is it something she talked about with you once or more than once during the 6-hour conversation?
Once.
You said that you went from, well, let me ask you this. Did you give her any advice as a result of the things that she told you?
Yes.
And what was that advice?
Let's get a lawyer.
And that was based on what she told you?
Yes.
And did either you, well, let me ask you this. Did you yourself, meaning just you, take steps to try to locate a lawyer?
Yes.
And what steps were those?
Internet search.
And did Ms. Bond take steps to try to locate a lawyer?
Yes.
What step or steps was that?
Internet search.
When you left the Boston Common, was there, in your mind, a plan in place of next steps?
Yes.
What was that plan?
Notify the police.
Objection.
Okay, that's overruled.
To notify the police?
Yes.
Just yes or no, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So, Mr. Amoroso, while you were there on the Common having the discussion, did you or Ms. Bond notify the police?
No.
And now I'm going to ask you, and you can only answer for yourself, why didn't you notify the police when you were on the Common?
I wanted to protect her story, what she was telling me. I believed her. I believed what she was telling me. I didn't feel like she was making it up.
Let me just...
Okay, with regard to that last statement, that's, again, we haven't gone into the statement, but I would strike that last portion. Can you direct the witness a little bit here?
Certainly. Without commenting on what you believe, and I know it can be difficult, but specifically, why didn't you call the police right there from the Common? You both had cell phones, right?
I wanted her to tell my mother that Bella was dead.
Okay. And is that at least part of the reason why you went to Lynn?
Yes.
How did you get to Lynn?
Bus, train.
Which bus and train did you take?
Well, we jumped on the T, and then we got off at Wonderland Station in Revere, and then we jumped on the 442 to Central Square in Lynn, and walked to the house from there.
And about how long a trip is that?
An hour.
When you got home, when you got to your mother's home, was anyone there?
Yes.
Who?
My mother and her husband.
And this was Thursday, September 17th?
Yes.
About what time did you get to Lynn, to your mother's home in Lynn?
It was about 6:30, maybe 7:30 p.m.
Do you, based on your observations of Ms. Bond, how would you describe her demeanor as you arrived at your parents' house?
Very scared, quiet.
What did you do that evening at your mother's house?
That evening, we searched on the internet for pro bono lawyers, and we talked, and she told me more of the story, showed me a lot of pictures.
What did she show you pictures on?
She showed me pictures of Bella,
But what was she using to show you pictures?
her cell phone.
The new cell phone that she had just bought?
It was actually one of pictures from out of the old cell phone that she had.
And where did the conversation happen at your parents' house? Like where in the house?
In the living room on the couch.
How long a conversation? You said you got there 7 or 7:30. How long did that go on, the two of you talking and her showing you pictures?
All the way into early morning.
And what happened in the early morning hours?
I jumped in the shower and started to get ready. I told her to get ready, that we were about to go to the police.
And I'm sorry to ask a personal question, but when you showered, did you shower alone?
Yes.
At any point did Ms. Bond join you in the shower?
She did not jump in the shower.
I didn't say
no.
jump, I said join you.
Join me in the shower, no.
Were the two of you intimate that night at any point?
No.
What time was it when you told Ms. Bond to get ready, she was going to turn herself in?
9 a.m.
And was it, well, let me ask you, when you say turn herself in, was it your expectation that she would be arrested?
Yes.
Before, at some point that morning, did something happen at your home? Was the news on in your mother's house?
Yes.
And did something come on the news that caught everyone's attention?
Yes.
What was it?
We have cracked the baby doe case.
This was a news report?
Yes.
And had you seen yourself information about the baby doe case before that time?
No, never.
Do you recall anything that they said on the news report? Well, no, I'll withdraw that question, Your Honor. Approximately how long was the news report, if you know?
I'm not really sure. We ended up leaving pretty much right away.
Did something strike your attention after the news report came on, as the news report was on?
Yes.
What happened?
Massachusetts State Police was at the door.
But before that happened, when the news report came on, did anybody say anything about it?
Yes. Rochelle said to my mother, that's Bella.
And how did your mother react?
She broke down.
When your mother broke down, did you see Ms. Bond's reaction?
Yes.
What was her reaction?
She kept saying she was sorry.
How long did that go on?
Maybe 2 minutes.
And at the end of that 2 minutes, what happened?
Her and I was taken into custody for questioning.
Did you give Ms. Bond did you make any suggestions to Ms. Bond before you were taken into custody with specific reference to her phone?
Yes.
What was that?
She left me her phone to be able to keep pictures of Bella. She wanted me to have the pictures that were on there.
How many phones did she leave you?
2.
Which two? The one that she just
The
described?
one
was
that
the
she
picture?
had turned on the previous day, and her old phone.
Did she give you? Had she given you any other personal belongings?
Yes.
What were they?
She gave me some little stones that had belonged to Bella that she found on the beach. Some gems. She also had left me her purse with all of her personal information in it. Credit cards, identification, a lot of paperwork. I really didn't go through it.
Did you make any suggestion? Well, let me ask you this: in the morning when you were there at your parents' house, was Ms. Bond's, the new phone, the one that was actually working, was it on or off?
It was. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that, please?
The phone that she had activated shortly before that day, was that turned on at that time or turned off?
It was turned off.
And did you give her any suggestion about what she should do about her phone in terms of it being turned off?
Yes, I told her to take the battery and the chip out.
Was that that morning, or had you told her that earlier?
I told her that earlier.
And that morning, did you make a suggestion to her as to turning her phone on?
Yes.
What was that?
I said to her, are you ready now? Put the battery and the chip back in the phone. Don't be surprised if they're already here.
And what did you do then?
We had started to walk towards the door.
And what happened as you walked towards the door?
Detective, sorry, I can't remember her name. She knocked on the door, one of the detectives, and she identified herself.
Did someone open the door?
Yes,
Who?
I did.
What happened when you opened the door?
They came in and took Rochelle and myself into custody.
Did they take you into custody?
Not as a suspect or anything, no.
How did you wind up going with them?
I rode in the back seat with them.
And is that something that they ordered you to do, or something you wanted to do?
Something I wanted to do.
Why?
I wanted to help them as much as I possibly can.
What happened when you? Well, where did you go in the car?
We went to the state barracks over Chelsea district.
And what happened when the two of you got there?
She went in one room, I went in the other room.
And what happened to you in the other room?
I gave a full statement.
Was that recorded, if you know?
Yes.
Did you turn anything over to the police as you gave your statement?
A cell phone at that time. I believe Rochelle turned in her cell phone. I turned in my cell phone as well.
Your own personal cell phone?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of what was going to happen with your cell phone?
There.
Overruled. I'm sorry. What was his understanding? Do you want to rephrase
I'll
that?
rephrase the question. Why did you give them your phone?
To help them.
And just yes or no, did they tell you what they were going to do with it?
Yes.
And were you okay with what they were going to do with it?
Yes.
And you said you turned over another phone. Which phone was that?
That was Rochelle's older phone with all of pictures and phone numbers and stuff in it.
You turned that over that day?
Not that day.
Okay, so let's stick with that day. When you were there being interviewed, what did you turn over that day?
Only my cell phone.
Did you turn over any of Rochelle Bond's belongings that
No.
she had given you? I'm sorry?
No.
Why not?
I was holding on to it.
How long was your interview at the police barracks?
Probably about 3 hours.
And what happened at the end of it?
They drove me back to Lynn, to my mother's
To your
house.
mother's house? And did you still have Ms. Bond's belongings with you?
Yes.
At some point, did you turn over those belongings to law enforcement?
Yes.
When was that?
It was a few days later.
And what prompted you to turn them over?
Well, I went through the cell phone. I went through all the pictures. I had seen some stuff that, I wasn't too sure of, and I thought that it could be used as evidence. And
At this point, Your Honor, I would like to be seen Sidebar.
Okay. And I would like to change the lunch hour a little bit and have you come back at 1:45. Because I'm going to have a short conversation here with the counsel. And again, it's easier if we have that in open court without you present. So we're going to excuse you now and have you come back at 1:45. We'll see you then.
Court, all right.
You understand that you're still under oath.
yes, sir.
Mr. Amoroso, you just testified, while the jury was still here, that you looked through the phone, Ms. Bond's phone, and saw photographs that you thought might be useful as evidence in the case. Is that right?
Correct.
And do you recall what you told, what types of photos they were that you saw that you thought might be useful to the case?
I seen photos of Bella with the defendant, like sitting on his lap. I seen photos of Bella on a mattress. I could not tell if she was still alive in those pictures. Maybe it was a psychological thing right there that was playing with my mind. But I needed to turn those photos in because I thought it would be helpful to the state police.
And on April 28th, so 6 weeks ago or so, did you meet with myself and a trooper and a victim witness advocate at the district attorney's office to prepare you for your testimony here today?
Yes.
And were you shown some photographs from Ms. Bond's cell phone based on your description of the photos you had seen that concerned you?
Yes.
And were you also allowed to look at date stamps on some of those photographs?
Yes.
And based on your review of, were you shown photographs? Well, actually, why don't I, for the record, Your Honor, perhaps you could mark these as for identification.
Yes. There's one.
No, sequential.
Q and R for identification.
So, Mr. Amoroso, I'm going to show you, I'll put it up on the screen. This is Exhibit Q for identification. Can you see it on your screen?
Yes.
And is one of these photographs one of the photographs that you saw that concerned you as to whether Bella had a black eye?
Yes.
Which number is it? You can just read the last three numbers. You don't have to read the whole number.
It's the second column over to the right, second picture down.
And what are the last three digits of that number?
007.
And were you shown, after you were shown 007, were you also shown 001 through 011?
Yes.
And how did that affect your concern about Bella having a black eye in photograph 007?
Well, after viewing it and speaking with you guys, I felt a lot better about it. I had noticed that it was just a 2-year-old little girl, possibly sitting on the bed, swinging back and forth.
So Having looked at this series of photos, did you have any further concern as to 007?
No.
And were you also allowed to see date stamps for these photos?
Yes.
And did that affect your thinking at all?
It made me feel better.
I'm going to show you what's Exhibit R for identification. And I know, I'm sorry that in the small format these photographs are in some ways difficult to see, but do you recognize any of these photographs as the type that concerned you?
Yes.
Which ones, or which one or ones?
I would say Exhibit 021,
Okay. Down in the lower left.
lower left. Top one, 51.
Number 51.
Top left.
On top of the one that's on the bottom. Yeah.
Can't really see too clear, but I want to say that it looks the same as top row, second to the last.
And just seeing all these pictures together, that's AA_art_1.
Yes.
Just seeing those photographs all together, did they change your level of concern?
Yes.
Why is that?
It just looked really shady. I couldn't understand why there were so many pictures taken of Bella on a mattress. What it appeared to have been mattress on the floor, and that's what it looked like to me. Just they looked real shady.
Do they still appear shady to you?
Not really.
Were you allowed to see date stamps associated with these photographs?
Yes.
Did that change your thinking at all?
Yes.
I have no further questions on board here.
Okay. So Mr. Shapiro, your objection, well, actually, why don't you articulate your objection to this being brought out on direct? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Amoroso, are you, when you looked through the photographs back in September of 2015, they were on Ms. Bond's phone, were they not?
Correct.
And you looked through literally hundreds of those photographs.
Yes.
And those photographs extended over, well, you didn't see the timestamps then, did you?
No.
But they were literally hundreds and hundreds of photographs.
There were a lot.
Now, you're not telling us today that you remember the specific photographs back in September of 2015 that you remember looking at then.
I do remember.
You remember exactly the photographs?
Yes.
And did you write down the numbers back then?
No.
So what you're telling us is, looking through, did you look through those hundreds of photographs again when you met with the DA and the state police a couple months ago?
Not all of them.
They picked out some for you, didn't they?
No. Those were the photos that was my concern that I picked out to them.
Okay. But you didn't look through all of the photographs that you had looked through back then when you met with the DA recently.
There
Did
was
you?
no need to.
I didn't ask you whether there was any need to. I asked you whether or not, when you met with the DA, you looked through those hundreds and hundreds of photographs.
We did not look through those hundreds of photographs.
So who picked out these particular photographs?
I did.
From what group of photographs?
From when I turned in the phone.
Well, you said that there were hundreds and hundreds of photographs on the phone, but when you met with the DA recently, you didn't look through all of them.
No.
So how did you decide which photographs to look through?
Those photographs that were brought to me were developed because those were the photos. That was my concern.
What do you mean, the photographs that were brought to you? What do you mean?
The same ones we just looked at, sir.
Who brought them to you?
Mr. Deacon and my witness advocate, Kara Hayes, along with Dan Herman.
All right, so they picked out certain photographs and showed them to you.
They showed me the same photographs that I had picked out almost a year and a half ago when I turned in the cell phone, and I said, I'm concerned about these photos right here.
So now your testimony is that when you turned in the phone back in September of 2015, on September 25th, 2015, is it your testimony that at that date you picked out certain photographs and showed them to the police?
Yes.
Do you know whether there's any record of that?
I do know that I was on recording every time that I met up with them to speak.
Right. And we have those recordings, and we know that there's no identification on those recordings of any specific photographs. Are you going to tell us that the recordings are wrong?
No.
So you didn't identify any of those photographs when you were being recorded and made a statement, did you?
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't.
I didn't point out pictures under a recording, no.
And so, when you met recently with the DA, he provided you with some photographs,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
And you only looked at the photographs that he provided you, right?
Correct. I looked at all of them that he provided, yes.
That he provided. So you didn't look back on the phone to see whether there were any other photographs that might have fit what you are now saying or what you then said you were concerned about, did you?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that for me, please?
When you met recently with the DA, you didn't go back and look at all of the photographs that you had looked at back in September 18th.
No.
So you only looked at the '17 photographs that you were shown this morning.
Correct.
And is it your testimony that these 17 photographs were the exact photographs that you remember from almost 2 years ago when you met with the state police?
Yes.
And you say that you're no longer concerned about these photographs, right?
Correct.
But back in September, you had just heard Ms. Bond's story, right?
Right.
And you had heard she had told you about how Bella had been treated?
Yes.
And of course, you knew that Ms. Bond had been using drugs.
Yes.
And you had complained previously about her treatment of Bella to DCF, right?
Correct.
And so when you saw pictures which you thought that Bella looked like she was under the influence, you were concerned
True.
because of what had happened before.
Yes.
That was your state of mind then.
Yes.
That's when you also saw pictures which you thought there was a black eye,
Yes.
and there was also a picture you thought there was blood on her face.
Yes.
And there were pictures where you thought that Bella was dead.
Yes.
And all of that was because you had recently heard about what had happened from Ms. Bond,
Yes.
and you knew a lot about what had happened previously with Bella and Ms. Bond.
Yes.
And at that time, you didn't know the date the pictures were taken, did you?
No.
So basically now that you know things are changed, things are different, you have more information, you have the dates, now you feel differently.
I do. A little
Now,
bit.
now you're not concerned.
Not as concerned as I was when I first
And
heard
that's-
the news.
And that's basically because the DA and the police have assured you that these photographs don't indicate that Bella was dead or under the influence because they were taken at some other time.
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Briefly, if I might, Your Honor. Mr. Amoroso, did you, when you spoke to the police way back when about the photos that concerned you, did you show them the photos or describe them for them? In other words, did you scroll through and point out photos, or did you describe what you had seen?
I described to them, I believe. I don't remember
Nothing further.
scrolling.
Okay, so the issue that was raised on at the sidebar is the late disclosure, that I'm sorry, Mr. Amoroso, you can step down
Okay.
and step outside while I'm talking to the lawyers. Okay, so I've heard the voir dire. It's very effective cross-examination that could, in fact, be made in front of the jury. But as I understand it, Mr. Shapiro, your objection is focusing on this late disclosure. So maybe you can articulate your objection.
Two things. The late disclosure, and also, this testimony is not relevant given the fact that back then he had concerns based upon everything that had happened. That is what, if anything, that's what's relevant. The fact that now he's been provided with information from the DA, from the police, that allays the concern that he felt is not relevant. That's not at all pertinent to, let's put it this way, to the extent that his reaction to the photographs back in 2015 is relevant. It was his state of mind and his reaction at that time that's important.
Yes.
The fact that he's now being provided with information that allays his concerns because now he knows when the death is alleged to have occurred, that he knows when the photographs were taken.
Okay, I get your drift.
That's just not relevant.
Okay, frankly, Mr. Deacon, to some degree, this seems more relevant as to what happened on April 28th. On redirect, that is, to the extent the subject comes up about photos and his concerns and that kind of thing, it's going to be explored presumably as fully as Mr. Shapiro just did without the jury present. And then, to the extent you bring out the April 28th meeting, is to try to show that he then looked at the date stamps. And then, of course, Mr. Shapiro has recross as to that. So I guess I wonder why we're getting into this on direct examination, it does seem, but maybe I should hear from you.
No, Your Honor, I don't disagree with that, particularly given the posture of the situation. Again, I was trying to draw this thing. I was trying not to appear to hide from the jury that evidence, but
that seems to be a problem for Mr. Shapiro. So I'd rather avoid that issue.
And I certainly agree that it would be fair for the Commonwealth to allow me to explore on redirect. I would suggest that that I think Mr. Shapiro has raised an issue that I think is worthy of some consideration. He said, to the extent that this is relevant at all, I would suggest that since defense counsel has all the photos on the phone from the forensic examination, that what Mr. Amoroso made of photographs is really not terribly relevant, and as we can see, highly prejudicial and very much a red herring. I think there's an argument that defense counsel can introduce any photos that he wants from the phone, but that to elicit his opinion that some photographs concern him is sort of beside the point and actually usurps the province of the jury. Candidly, Your Honor, this entire thing strikes me as a red herring. In other words, he saw photos, he was upset, he jumped to conclusions. We now know that, at least according to him, he doesn't think the same way anymore.
Okay.
And I think there's an argument for just excluding the topic, but to the extent that Your Honor doesn't accept that argument, I would agree that I could explore on redirect.
Okay, so Mr. Shapiro, you clearly want to get into this topic about these photos that concern him, right?
Yes.
Okay, so given that, I would then allow Mr. Deacon to attempt to, I don't know if it's rehabilitate or explain these photos in any way he sees fit on redirect. With regard to the late disclosure, I don't think that, this happens all the time where witnesses change their testimony. You've been able to explore it fully in voir dire. You will be able to go into this on cross-examination, but then Mr. Deacon would be allowed on redirect to talk about these photos that have been marked for identification, and then of course there'll be recross. So I think the late disclosure is no longer an issue. I think the ordering of this questioning, I would have this on a redirect as opposed to the direct, and wait and see what Mr. Shapiro does with these photos, and then we'll go from there. Of course, that will open up some questions for Mr. Shapiro on recross.
May I, Your Honor, seek a ruling on one issue? I would like to ask him on direct now, where we've left off, if he deleted any photos or changed or deleted any photos before, after he got the phone and turned it over.
You can ask that. You can ask that. Okay.
The only thing I want to say is, I do think it's an issue.
I'm sorry, you do think what?
I do think late disclosure is an issue,
Okay.
but I am not objecting to going forward because I want to move this along as well as anybody else.
Okay, well, good.
But I do think that when this happens, we should be notified promptly about it.
I think that's true.
For the record, Your Honor, I don't disagree. I sent an email to Mr. Shapiro last night apologizing for the error, and I just want to make clear, I'm not defending the late disclosure in any way. I have, throughout this case, made quite a number of disclosures of witnesses who changed testimony during their trial preparation. And I just want the record to be very clear that I'm not suggesting that it was appropriate to delay the disclosure. I didn't do it on purpose, and that's the only record I want to make. That I'm not arguing that it was appropriate to delay.
Okay, so we'll take a recess. I did tell the jury quarter till Mr. McCarthy should get as long as he feels is appropriate, but please be back here a little before 2 if you can, so we can get started promptly.
Court, all rise, please. Court's in recess.